Welcome to the Zen Studies Podcast. I'm Domio Burke. Thanks to new supporting member of the podcast, Tina Marie from Henderson, Texas. It's August, and I'm on sabbatical from my Zen center, Brightway Zen. I also make the Zen Studies podcast a little lighter in August. So this episode is a talk I gave a couple of months ago at Brightway in response to a question submitted by a Sangha member. Periodically, I have folks write down questions and submit them anonymously, and then I draw questions out of an envelope and answer them without preparation. If you're a regular listener, you probably know that I like to be organized and prepared. However, a different kind of discussion ensues when things are more spontaneous. I hope you'll enjoy. Do I need to know when a teacher is trying to teach me something? I don't know if it's over mystifying to assume everything a teacher says to you is meant to be a teaching, or is it? Wondering how to relate to this. Yeah, I think most everybody here could probably answer that question if you thought about it, in the sense that, you know, how we can look at our lives and think of anyone and anything as being our teacher, you know, and often we talk about those with young kids, you know, they're my teacher, right? So in that sense, anything can be our teacher. So in that sense, like everything I do and say could be a teaching to you, for better or for worse. But I think maybe the best way to approach this is to remind ourselves of the principle of the middle way, where ours is the middle way, and that means not being caught in either extreme. So in this case, the extreme would be basically saying like, oh, whatever, anybody can be, you know, everything's a teacher. So in that sense, but like a Zen teacher, you know, it's no more meaningful than that. But the other extreme is to say, no matter what I do, even if I do something unethical or unkind, it's a teaching and it's my great wisdom. I mean, and this is not, it's not limited to Zen, but we know that there are plenty of people out there right now and in the past who have done that and made that claim and are surrounded by people who believe it. They, you know, it's the making of a cult and everything between here and there, right? Where such great insight and wisdom that even if the teacher does something that seems just like quite wrong or hurtful or anything, that they are not careless, they are not human, they are not selfish, they're not self-absorbed, they're not short-sighted, they're not wrong, right? They have some greater plan that anything they do is eventually going to be of benefit and bring people to greater, you know, awakening or liberation or salvation. So that's that's an extreme, and the other extreme is to kind of blow it off. So not everybody really wants or is interested in relating to Zen teachers in the way that is often presented in our lineage, right? In our lineage, we chant this line of, you know, this is Shakyamuni Buddha and then Makakasho and then all these teachers. Our tradition's mythology is that what the essence of Zen has been passed down person to person, face to face through the generations. That is not something you can get from a book. Essentially, in that lineage list, each person awakened to the truth themselves, and then the teacher simply recognizes that has happened and therefore acknowledges that, and that's what the lineage passage is. So there's many stories in Zen of, you know, the interactions between the teacher and the student, and the teacher hits the student over the head with a sandal and the student goes, I'm greatly awakened. And, all of this stuff, which suggests a kind of unique, kind of hierarchical relationship, one with some tension, one with some sense that the teacher has an idea of what the student will look like awakened, and the student is working and struggling, and the teacher might nudge or advise or say, no, that's not it. So not everybody is really interested in that aspect of Zen, and I think that is fine. There are many different aspects to our tradition, including ritual and ceremony and long meditation retreats and Dharma study and all of this stuff. I firmly believe that if you take any one part of that, it is beneficial. You don't have to swallow the whole package. I mean, I recommend the whole package, but I should, right? That's what I'm here for. But any one of it, right? If that's all you do is sit zazen, if that's all you do is come to Dharma talks, if that's all you do is practice the precepts, all of that is great. So this whole aspect of the kind of traditional Zen teacher-student relationship is not something that you should feel like you have to engage. If it doesn't just naturally intrigue, then I say don't bother with it. My example is always like, so my husband practiced Zen for quite a few years, and he's drifted away from it, but he never in a million years would he ever have thought of somebody as like my teacher. It's just it's not in his makeup, right? That is no. So that said, those of us that do feel that kind of attraction, for lack of a better word, to relating to somebody in this way, which I certainly did very early after I arrived at Zen. I will know I wanted Gyokoko to be my teacher, even if I didn't know what that really meant or what that could mean. But what it ended up meaning to me was that I wanted to commit to letting her see me and see my practice, exposing myself enough through, not just through like, let's sit down and talk about my practice, but also through time and proximity, right? Being around, engaging the Dharma around her, so that she got to see me in many different circumstances, strengths and weaknesses and all of that, so that she could give me insight on my practice, maybe point out the blind spots, which by nature we can't really see, right? So I often think of this as, it's not so much that a Zen teacher has some kind of supernatural ability to detect what somebody needs. It's that, hopefully, the idea is that they have done enough work on themselves, that they get themselves out of the way, and they can give the feedback, if asked for, in a way that is not, that the self doesn't get involved. I don't feel superior. I don't want to encourage dependence and, self-aggrandizement by pointing out your faults, and then you're grateful I pointed out your faults. Like, there's all kind of twisted ways where a teacher, and sometimes teachers do, right, get caught up in the situation. Or you know what I think you really need? I think you really need to have sex with me. I think that's what is going to truly liberate you. Yes, that's against the precepts, but it's your enlightenment that's at stake. So hopefully teachers trained, we have some methods for doing this, so better than nothing, have trained to get themselves out of the way. And honestly, if our spouses or parents or children or good friends had had that training and didn't have like the personal relationship and investment in us, they would probably have some valuable things to say about our blind spots as well. Right? But it's not really, that's not a dynamic you really want to introduce into those relationships. That's not where it belongs. So it's not so much that the teacher has some great profound insight into your character, although, of course, the more time you've spent with the teacher, the more you have shown, the more you have just been around, then I know you better, right? I've seen you in different settings, and for instance, I was a junior monk and I went down to Tassajara when I was a postulant for ordination. So I wanted to be ordained, and I went down there for a practice period in the summer, and I loved it. And I was really excited about studying with Rev Anderson, and I fell in love with the monk, and like I just was like, okay, I gotta stay down here. But I had, the whole point was I was down there because I was going to come back and complete ordination with my teacher. So I met one of my Dharma sisters. She just happened to be down in San Francisco, and I was on a little break from Tassajara. And I was telling her all about this, right? Like, I think I need to stay at the monastery. I'm meant to be at the monastery, and Reb is great, and then I fall in love with this guy and whatever. And she's just like, I think you need to go home. And I realized, like, oh, I was able to talk to all kinds of people down there about how this was the thing I should do. And they were like, oh my, yeah. If you love the monastery, oh, if you're inspired by Reb, yeah, oh, that sounds like a good relationship. They don't know me, right? They just met me. And if I went home where all these folks had known me for a good, like, I don't know, 7 years by then, they'd all be like, oh, what? You just got divorced so that you could like go to the monastery. So now you're gonna get another relationship? All right, see, Red doesn't even know you, and you've just invested 5 years into a relationship with Gyokoko. Seriously. So that's an example of like not just the teacher actually, right? But other folks in the Sangha, they get to know you, and they get to know your karma, and they get to know, so that when the decision points come up or difficulty or something, and you really ask for some honest feedback, then they might be able to give you some kind, right? Not just critical and I get to prove that you're insufficient or anything, but just if you're really asking, they'll nudge, point you in the right direction. I don't know. I mean, in that sense of, so I only have 2 formal students at this point. So I have Jinryu and Shoketsu, who are both here today. And I think I have many times, well, I probably not that often, but there have been times I have hurt their feelings. And it has been completely accidental, right? Like it's my karma. I get oblivious. I'm trying to get too much shit done. I don't know, whatever. And like,
you've heard it.
They told me.
Okay.
Afterwards, they're just like, and almost kind of like, was that a teaching or was that, am I supposed to get something from that? And then I'll just be like, oh, I'm sorry. And yet at that deeper level, right, that can be a teaching. I mean, it can bring up insecurities. It can bring up other things that it's not like I set out deliberately to do that, but it can be made a teaching, right? So I would say it's pretty rare. It's pretty rare that I go like, what they need. They need this thing. It's more, Gyokoko described it as, and this is especially true in Soto Zen, because in Rinzai, you have this whole thing about this curriculum of koans that you're working through. And you've said you want to work on koans, and so I assign you a koan, and then you go off, and then you come to me and you demonstrate it to me, and I say, no, not yet. So there's like a very different dynamic there. But in Soto, it's much more vague, right? It's like, do the thing. Go forth and do that thing. that goal of goallessness and check in every once in a while. But Gyokiko described it as she knows it when she sees it. So I'm not going to know what each person's path should look like. Somebody here today, your path might be Zen's all wrong for me. I need to return to my Christian roots, right? That may be exactly what your path should look like. And I'm not necessarily going to know, right? You are finding your own way with the context of the teachings and the practices and the Sangha and all that. It's not always the case, but oftentimes you can just get this sense of like, that looks like from what you are demonstrating, that sounds like something that is actually opening things up for you. That is a way forward. So anyway, any thoughts or Betty?
So you mentioned that you have two formal student-teacher relationships currently. What does that look like? What are the criteria? What are the expectations? A lot of questions around that. Sorry.
Yeah.
Well, as you asked, so it's a kind of interesting story, which I do describe on the website. If anybody wants to look at kind of more detail, I think it's under like our practice and then like paths of practice. So I talk about the way that we treat Jukai. And then it's always like where to start. Okay. So it's like our tradition. What is our tradition? So let me start with kind of the biggest picture, the way most Zen centers do it. And then the way Dharma Rain does it, which is where I trained, and then the way I am doing it. So the biggest picture, so if you go to other Zen centers, and if you mention that you have received Jukai, they'll go like, oh, okay, I know what that means most of the time. But then you will find somebody with a rakusu and a name. So for those folks, for most of those lineages, you will have been around for quite a number of years, 3-4 years, and really establish yourself as part of the Sangha, and you've done a study of the precepts, and then you ask to receive the precepts, and then you sew your rakusu, this kind of bib-like garment, and go through the ceremony and receive a Dharma name. But that generally does not mean that you've taken a teacher. And it can be done differently. Obviously, Dharma Rain decided to do it differently, so you never really know. But generally speaking, there's not a widespread idea that lay people are going to take teachers formally. That they're going to practice and they can be diligent, but they're not going to take a teacher, because in the context of our lineage, taking a teacher has been associated with ordination as a monk. And when you become ordained, you're asking to be trained in a particular way. So this makes sense, right? If somebody someday wanted me to ordain them as a monk, and they'd have to be around for a while and all of that stuff, then I would say now we understand there's be like 5 years of time when you devote yourself. That's your primary thing. So you cannot have dependent children. You cannot have dependent elder parents at the time, because like you can't give your whole focus to this. So then you would need to spend a significant amount of time in monastery. We don't have one, so we would choose one, right? But a significant amount of time in residential practice, and you need to learn these ceremonies, you need to serve the Sangha, and you need to, like, I would have this whole list of things. Like if you want to become a monk or a priest in our lineage to serve a Sangha, this is the things you'd have to do. So that's, then as a teacher, that makes, it's pretty straightforward. No, now you got to do this thing, not doing a good enough job on this thing. And you also includes your behavior, right? Like if you're just an arrogant asshole, like I'm going to be like, we got some work to do. So the clarity with the monkhood, but generally speaking, you could seek out teaching. You could go to a retreat, you can listen to the teachings, you can listen to Dharma talks and stuff like that. But the idea that you have a teacher and they are guiding your practice and there's kind of this formal understanding is not common. Now, then my teachers, Kogan and Gyokoko at Dharma Rain, were particularly interested in really supporting and developing lay practice. Ironically, they came from Shasta Abbey, which in that lineage, and things may have changed as well. I haven't practiced with them myself, but there's a huge emphasis on the ordained. And the ordained and lay are kept separate, but just, I don't know, it's easier to get the impression that if you really wanted to do this, you would go get ordained as a monk. Whereas my teachers saw the depth of lay practice and really wanted to give that a path of its own. So they came up with the concept of lay discipleship. They separated out Jukai. Actually, Roshi Kennett did this. Jukai became a much more open door. So they did it just like we do it, which is as long as you've been around for the 6 months or so, and then you go through the precept study and you really want to do this and you become a member of Right Way, then you're welcome to receive the precepts and consider yourself a formal Zen Buddhist and join the Sangha in that way. So it's very open. You don't have to sew a rakusu. You don't have to be around for years, right? So that's an open gate, but then for them, the lay discipleship at Dharma Rain, you would have been around for a few years and have established an ongoing relationship with one of the teachers. So they have multiple teachers, and you will have, and the nice thing about a place like that is they have multiple teachers, lay and ordained, so you can kind of try them out. You can go to that teacher and go to that teacher and kind of shop around and choose which one you feel a rapport with, right? So then they will, when they ask for lay discipleship, they are asking you to be that person to be their formal teacher. And so then there's a ceremony and they sew a rakusu and receive a dharma name. I'm doing it a little differently. That's what Shoketsu and Jinryu, I just said oh, I'll do that lay discipleship thing that Dharma Rain did. So they, had decided, and as Shoketsu reminded me, you have to ask 3 times. So there has to already be, it's not like you just show up off the street and say, ask 3 times, right? Okay, just chill out, participate with the Sangha. It's I think of it as you don't ask somebody to marry you before you date. Find out if this is something that actually works for you or not. But then I have decided to switch things up because this is just my opinion, but I am a teacher who founded my own Zen center, so I get to do what I want. Sometimes I found it a little unhelpful as a Sangha member at Dharma Rain when someone would receive lay discipleship from one of the teachers, but that person really didn't have a relationship with the rest of the Sangha. That person really didn't, I didn't really know them, or they didn't really, they didn't really participate or help out. They just had this special thing with this teacher, and now they get to wear a rakusu and have a dharma name, and inevitably, even though it's not supposed to give you any kind of status or power, it's influential. You walk in and there's somebody with a dharma name and a rakusu, and you're clearly been around a while. So inevitably these folks had impacts, and they weren't really primarily what went on was between them and the teacher privately in the Sanzen room. So the only way to kind of address any issues in their behavior was to like go to the teacher, and then the teacher would go like, but then the teacher like accept them as a disciple and were often kind of biased, I thought. So I don't know. It just didn't, it seemed too divorced from the Sangha. And then for another reason, I've switched up the way that I'm doing it because I looked around our Sangha. I would just put lay discipleship on a shelf for a while. Initially it was kind of like kind of obvious and on the website, whatever. And then I was just kind of like, eh, let's just, think about this for a while. Then I found myself looking around the Sangha, realizing there are people in the Sangha who've been around long enough, who have really started to immerse themselves in our tradition, who have been to session, who have been to retreat, who have served the Sangha in many ways, who, even if they can't just get up here and rattle off all the teachings, they're familiar enough with them and they can answer, they've led precept classes and they've done all those kinds of things. So I'm kind of like, these are the folks that, it feels like should be in this other, some kind of acknowledgement of that. So the way that I am doing it now is I'm calling it Zaike Tokido, which is really what lay discipleship is called in Japan, even though it doesn't have that. It's not about a teacher-student relationship. Actually, the Zaike Tokido in Japan, where lay people sew a rakusu and get a dharma name, tends to be the wives of temple priests. So priests who, because priests can get married and so they're responsible for a temple, but then frankly, the wife does a lot of the work and probably knows a lot of how things are supposed to go. So she's not ordained, but then the wife will often receive Zaike Tokido. So now, she has a dharma name, she has a rakusu. So anyway, this is kind of how it inspired us. So Zaike Tokido is a step in our Sangha, which we have a batch of people working toward this, sewing rakusus and working toward this step. I like to phrase it as you have decided to make nurturing and sharing the three treasures part of your bodhisattva vow. That is not necessary, right? You can be respectful of the three treasures. You can, but like your life you may be a doctor, you may be a parent, you may be, you manifest most of your bodhisattva activity in other ways. But if you really feel like, I want to be part of making sure Bright Way Zen is strong and vital and lasts, and to help, share its dharma with more people, that kind of thing, then you're taking these, making these additional vows in addition to the precepts. And so you have to ask 3 times. And although I'm waiving that for the first group because they've been around forever. So I basically said, if you want to do it, you could do it. But then there's a second batch who I suggested this path to, and they're in the process of asking 3 times and thinking about it. But I separated that out from this whole idea of the formal teacher-student relationship, because I want people to do this Zaike Tokido thing, and I'm only one teacher here, and those people may or may not feel this desire and resonance for this kind of personal guidance thing. And I may not be the right teacher for them as well. So I just wanted to separate those out so that people could make this commitment to Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, this deeper commitment. And then maybe separately, they want to ask for that more personal witness guidance kind of thing. So that we'll have to ask 3 times about that as well. And the whole 3 times thing, if anybody isn't familiar, is it requires the asker to clarify and be sure that they want to do it. And it also makes it clear that this is coming from the student and not, the Sangha trying to strong arm people into like, getting deeper into the cult or whatever. So yeah, Junior.
I have a very quick question, and then I have some thoughts. So in the Zaike Tokudo, are they establishing a formal relationship with you as a teacher?
Well, I mean, kind of yes and no, in the sense that it's not this, it's not the way that like lay discipleship at Dharma Reign, right? Where it's kind of this indefinite mutual commitment, kind of till death do us part. I will witness, guide your practice, and you will come, make yourself accountable and visible and, that kind of thing. So not necessarily that. And yet the rest of it, the whole process of the Zaike Tokudo, which is in order to do that, I want somebody to have attended session, do retreats, and do practice roles, and do service to the Sangha. And so in those contexts, I'm a teacher, right? So it is asking people to submit, for lack of a better word, to my teaching, but not necessarily in that kind. I mean, it's personal, but it's more about how it manifests as service to the Sangha.
And just some thoughts, in the way you're describing all this rather matter-of-factly, and I can only talk about my own personal experience. It was very personal. And I knew that I wanted guidance. I knew that this was going to be like inseparable. I mean, I went into this thinking this is not ever going to break, which puts a fair amount of responsibility on me, equally with the teacher, perhaps more on me. Because, there are those times when you want to say, I am done with this. And
Wow.
And I can do that, and I can go to her and do that, but I also know that it is not the end. I also know it can't be the end. It was, there are no rules about this, about asking 3 times. I took a year to do that. In fact, it had been so long since the first time and the third time, and I was emotional. And I bowed my head and I made this symbol because I didn't know if you would remember that was my third time. I don't know how that affects other people coming after me, but that's the way it was for me. I think that's it.
Well, that's definitely the way that it was for me as the only teacher at Bright Way at this point. It's kind of uncomfortable because I'm kind of like, I don't want to move you deeply. So then you're like, I think I need her as a teacher too. Like, I think if you feel that desire, and I think all of our practices, we're open-handed with all of it. It's Dharma Reign. If you don't feel that desire, if you feel weird about it, I mean, I think it's great to go to other teachers as well. I think it's great to go to retreats with other teachers, particularly to have sanzen, to have a one-on-one meeting with other teachers. Because not all, I don't know. Because for my teacher, I know I've told the story many times, but I knew right away. But I tend to kind of I know right away when I want to do something. And so I went to Sanzen with Kyogen, Gyokuko's husband, and I was asking him about this stuff. right? If you want somebody to be your teacher and like, how often do you have to ask and blah, blah, blah. And then I said, okay, thank you. And this is formal nonsense. So I got up and started walking out of the room. And he's like, but you have to ask. And I said, oh, I was going to ask Yokiko. I'm getting information from you, like I'm just casing things out. Because like I didn't, as much as I loved Kyogen, as much as I respected him, sometimes I just talked to him and I'd kind of feel like we're just kind of talking past each other, and I like he wasn't really listening or something like that, So I've been in those meetings with lots of teachers, and some I feel that kind of rapport with and some I don't. And yet then there's other people at Dharma Rain who are like, didn't have so much with Gyokiko, but Kyogen, that's where it was. So go figure. Bob and then Cedar.
Thank you, Domia. Just to relate my own experience around this, having asked before, and my experience there was that asking was one thing, but after the asking and waiting that span, it was a period of discernment for me as, okay, you've asked. That's a commitment and that's an expectation, and everything started lining up, and it became evident to me that I was not being honest with myself. Even though the teacher was perfectly fine, it's like, what is your motivation? Why this teacher? Why not this teacher? And I realized that, no, this is not fair. This is not right. And I backed completely out because it was not an honest and truthful kind of an ask. And it wouldn't have worked out because it just, no. In so many ways. But just the experience has given me great insight and amazing understanding of motivation. And am I kidding myself? I'm good at that. Kidding myself about this. So if anybody has any questions about asking, at least ask. You'll never find out either.
Yeah. And that brings up a really good point about what is it that you're looking for? What is it that you want? And then we have all different motivations for why we might just like we're led toward other kinds of intimate relationships, right? I might be drawn to a teacher because I think they're just so amazing and they're not anything like me, right? I want to be like that. Like I might go, be Reb student for that reason. I felt like when he spoke the Dharma, it was like sitting on Vulture Peak, listening to the Buddha, so there was kind of a glamour to it that I could see just being like, oh, I want, maybe if I becomes Reb student, it'll be easier to get enlightened, because he's so eloquent. Where the reason that I went back to my teacher is because I felt like she saw right through me. And I felt like when I asked a question, she answered the question that was under the question. I hope someday I might be able to do that. I don't know if that's even in me. It wasn't in Kyogen. So, and he was still a wonderful teacher. So who knows? I mean, that's sometimes where like, yeah, I'm great at explaining the Dharma, I guess. I got this podcast with 275 episodes, but like, can I answer the question that is below someone's question? That's something that I aspire to, but it takes a certain kind of person, certain kind of sensitivity, but that I couldn't bullshit her, which was it was hard. I mean, I believe that I took a few years off of her life because I wasn't just a lay student, I was her monastic student. And I don't like anybody telling me what to do. And I kicked and screamed. And I mean, I did it mostly passive aggressively, but I'm grateful, she was just like a rock. And I could just go up and, but what about this? What about this? What about this? And she just, so it's not even like she would like try to conflict with me or fight or anything or argue with me or anything. She'd just be like, and it's what I needed.
So that's it for today. I will release another episode soon. I hope you'll tune in. Thanks for listening.